Okay. Well, it's 5 o'clock, so let's begin. And I think you all got a notice as you came in that this call is being recorded, and the recording will be up on the Engaged Edmonton website by Monday, so that other Edmontonians and folks interested in the project can watch the recording. So they'll hear the bit of presentation that we're going to start with. And then also they'll hear the questions that are being asked and answered between now, which is 5 o'clock, and 5:45. So my name is Beth Sanders. I'm the host of this call this evening. And my role here is to moderate, set up the presenters, to give you some information. And in 20 minutes, they're going to stop, and I will stop also, and there'll be opportunity for people to ask questions. And in particular tonight, what we're looking for are questions about engagement, because this is a really big project. The engagement is a little bit tricky and complicated. And we're also doing engagement in some different ways because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and that we can't meet. So we wanted to make sure that people got both basic information about the zoning bylaw renewal initiative, but also give you a chance to make sure you're clear on how to engage, how to get your thoughts in. What information is the city looking for right now? That's the purpose for tonight. We'll do a round of introductions here in a moment. Michael, I'll get you to move on to the next slide, please, and the next one. Thank you, Michael. And we'll start with a land acknowledgement here. So the City of Edmonton acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Nakota Sioux, and the Blackfoot peoples. And we would like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors have marked this territory for centuries. And we also acknowledge that we are on the lands, the homelands of the Métis, and the home of one of the largest communities of the Inuit people south of the 60th parallel. Edmonton is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from all around the world to share and call Edmonton home. And we call together on our collective and honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and for future generations. And of course, that is the work we're here to do today on the zoning bylaw renewal initiative. Next slide, please, Michael. So I know that over the last 15 months, many of you have been getting quite familiar with Zoom, but just in case, I want to do a quick orientation. On the top right hand of your screen, there's a speaker view, gallery view. You can play with that during the meeting. While we have the screen share on, that's a little bit tricky, but please feel free to explore how it best works for you to see people and the screen. And on the bottom, if you're on a laptop or a computer, on the bottom of your screen are the buttons to mute yourself and to stop or turn on the video. And we encourage you to do whatever is comfortable with you when it comes to video. And please make sure that you're not, that mute is on when you're not speaking. It makes the quality of the call for all of us much easier, because we know that this can be tiring. It's much easier on our brains and our bodies if the ambient noise is not happening. The chat function is, thank you, Michael. The chat function is on, and we're going to use it in particular for you to ask questions of Trevor and Livia shortly, and would really encourage you to limit your use of chat so that if anybody is in need of any technical assistance, they're able to ask for help in the chat. Say a quick hello to folks if you'd like to do that right now. That makes perfect sense. It's fun to do. And then let's kind of keep our mitts off for a little while. All right, next slide, please, Michael. Okay, so the purpose tonight, there's three purposes. The first is to learn about the zoning bylaw renewal initiative. We know that you folks are wondering what's going on. There's some basic information that Trevor and Livia are going to deliver shortly. We also want to give you an opportunity to learn about the opportunities that are coming shortly here for public engagement and are already underway. And we also want to have a good chunk of space tonight for you to ask questions of clarification about the engagement. It's complicated. A zoning bylaw is huge. There's many topics. We want to make sure you know how to best offer your brilliance into the engagement process. Next slide, please, Michael. Okay, so our agenda, we're going to hear from Trevor and Livia, who are on the Zoning Bylaw Renewal Initiative team here shortly, and they're going to tell us about the initiative. Livia will tell us about that. Trevor's going to tell us about how to get involved, and then we're just going to shift gears by 20 minutes past the hour about engagement. Next slide, please, Michael. Okay. Ground rules, I've got 4 requests. I've kind of already said them. I'm going to be redundant here, but put yourself on mute when you're not speaking. Turn your video on if you can. If you can't for some reason, don't worry about it. Please use chat for technical assistance if you need to ask for help. And if you're not asking or providing technical assistance, the way I put it is just keep your fingers off. Keep your fingers off. And there's going to be 2 ways to ask questions. I'll remind you of this later. One is to write your question in the chat. And if you'd like to speak your question, I'll coach you on how you can raise your hand. I think I'll be able to see everybody, so you can old school raise your hand. And there's also a function in Zoom where you can raise your hand, and I'll be watching both of those. Okay, next, Michael. All right, so we're off to Livia and Trevor, who are going to zip us through, but not too zippy, the Zoning Bylaw Renewal Initiative. So Livia's going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then Trevor's going to speak for about 10. And then, folks, we're just going to shift gears to hearing your questions. Okay, off you go, Livia.
All right. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. So really appreciate you all attending the information session today. Like Beth mentioned, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes just doing a high-level overview about the initiative, why we're doing it, and then speaking to the schedule and some upcoming future engagement opportunities. So next slide, please. So I know there's going to be a bit of a range of audience members here, and so I just briefly want to talk about what the zoning bylaw is and what zoning is. Zoning is everywhere, from our parks and our playgrounds to garden suites and the downtown core. And the purpose of zoning is to determine what can be built where. It sets the rules for where new buildings should go, what types of buildings they can be, and what types of businesses and activities can happen on a property. Zoning guides growth in an orderly way to minimize conflicts between different activities and can improve the safety, public health, and welfare of its citizens and the environment. Zoning is also the main tool used to implement municipal development plans, such as Edmonton City Plan and other statutory plans and policies. Next slide, please. So the Zoning Bylaw Renewal Initiative is a multi-year comprehensive overhaul of our current zoning bylaw that includes rethinking how, what, and why the city regulates in terms of zoning and land development. The initiative's goal is to develop a strategic, simplified, and streamlined zoning bylaw to enable people, places, and businesses to thrive and prosper. And I just wanted to note that these key terms are taken right out of our city plan. Next slide, please. So why renew? So Edmonton's current zoning bylaw has not been updated in a comprehensive way since 2001. And in 2001, the update was largely a consolidation exercise designed to harmonize 5 different land use bylaws. And that was carried over from the city's annexation in 1982. And before that, the last significant rezoning bylaw rewrite was in 1961. So now 60 years later, many development regulations that were designed for a small prairie town are still shaping the built form of Canada's 5th largest city in 2021. So currently the zoning bylaw is overly complex. It has some strict zoning rules, cumbersome regulations, and it requires workarounds to prevent excellence in service delivery. The bylaw has more than doubled in size since 2001 to well over 800 pages. A lot of the processes that are aligned or come out of the zoning bylaw, so such as the development permitting process, rezoning process, are also costly for both the city and the applicant. And it's a response to the misalignment between the zoning bylaw and the types of development that residents want to see in their city. So we have a lot of rezoning applications going to public hearing. The zoning bylaw initiative is an opportunity to transform the way we, the city, deliver land development services to Edmontonians. As I mentioned, Edmonton City Council approved our new city plan, so our municipal development plan last December. And really, the city has made a concerted effort to update its policy framework over the last number of years. And renewing Edmonton's zoning bylaw really provides us that opportunity to strategically align our city building tools from the top down, from strategy to regulation, and ensure all Edmontonians and city builders have the tools necessary to build the city envisioned in the city plan. And lastly, our city plan gives us direction to be inclusive and compassionate city. With the zoning bylaw renewal initiative, we're taking those transformative city building ideas in the city plan and asking how our built form can help us live out our values in a more equitable way. Next slide, please. The city plan has 6 guiding values that articulate how Edmontonians want to experience their future city. These values, along with the city building outcomes and big city moves in the city plan, provided the direction needed for the new zoning bylaw to enable development and redevelopment opportunities and to create an attractive, vibrant urban city. The new zoning bylaw will enable compact, walkable, and mixed-use development that supports equitable access to employment, education, and amenities. It will also support the growth and resilience of a diverse economy so all Edmontonians have the opportunity to thrive. It'll allow for more adaptable development to give Edmontonians the opportunity to create. It'll allow for more diverse housing options that will contribute to a greater housing choice and affordability for Edmontonians to live in all neighborhoods. It will foster inclusive and welcoming places and public places so all Edmontonians can belong. And it will help mitigate land use impacts to preserve Edmonton's environment and maintain a high standard of living. So we combined feedback from Edmontonians from engagement that we did in 2018, 19, and later last year. We also looked into municipal best practices. We did jurisdictional scans, development trends, and also our new city policy to inform our approach to drafting the new zoning bylaw. And the approach falls into these 7 categories. We want to have a new layout and interface to improve user experience, accessible language that enables regulations to be understood by most people, a hybrid bylaw that will include form-based, use-based, and performance-based zoning. We want to have fewer, more enabling and inclusive zones with the purpose of standard zones accommodating a range of built forms. We have broader uses to allow for a greater range of activities to occur in a particular building or space. We want to have purposeful and enforceable regulations with a goal to reduce regulatory complexity. And we want to create a zoning bylaw for everyone. Next slide, please. So the zoning bylaw renewal initiative consists of 4 projects, which is listed on the slide here: the new zoning bylaw, rezoning, technology, and implementation. And more information on these projects can be found on the zoning bylaw renewal website. We are currently in phase 2 of the zoning bylaw renewal initiative. And during this phase, we're finalizing our approach to writing a new bylaw, figuring out the structure of the bylaw, and we'll begin writing the new zoning bylaw in July. And this phase will continue till the end of 2021. And public engagement during this phase is happening for this month, but also we'll be engaging with Edmontonians on a draft bylaw in early 2022, so from January to March 2022. And this is where we'll invite the public to help refine that draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Livia. Okay, Trevor, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So we'll provide some details here on the upcoming public engagement that we have planned. So engagement on the zoning bylaw renewal is occurring throughout this month. Your input will help to test and confirm our approach to 3 different topics that'll be fundamental to the structure and content of the new bylaw. Next slide. The 3 topics that we focused on for this phase of engagement include our proposed approach to zones, our proposed approach to uses, and our proposed approach to our residential areas. And during our previous round of engagement in the summer and fall of 2020, we prepared a series of discussion papers which explored some new directions and on a number of different aspects of the zoning bylaw. So in the time since, we've been working with a zoning advisory consultant to lead us through a context analysis of Edmonton's built form and its patterns of development. And this work, along with the engagement feedback that we've received from the discussion papers and the feedback that we will receive from this upcoming engagement, will help us solidify the foundations of the new bylaw. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about these specific topic areas here. So first, the approach to zones. This approach includes two main ideas. The first idea is adopting a hybrid zoning approach with form-based and use-based zoning. This idea would move us away from a bylaw that's primarily organized around specific land uses, which focus on the activities that can happen within a given building. So think like a retail store can happen here, but a restaurant can't. This typically results in land uses being separated from one another. For the new bylaw, we would move into more of a hybrid approach that uses both that approach and a form-based zoning approach. And this form-based approach would focus more on the building itself that creates flexibility for the activities to happen within. So this approach generally provides more opportunities for the mixing of uses, more context-specific design outcomes, opportunities for innovation in the way that we use our spaces. The second idea, excuse me, is to reduce the total number of zones. So currently we have 46 standard zones in the zoning bylaw, not to speak of all the other ones that I won't get into right now. But many of those they overlap with one another, they create redundancies. And at the same time, there's substantial gaps and limitations on the variety of building types and activities that can occur within any given zone. For the new bylaw, we're currently considering around 20 to 25 standard zones. For those of you that followed the discussion papers, you would see that that's an increase from the 15 that were proposed through that discussion paper engagement, but it still represents an overall reduction in the total number of zones for the zoning bylaw. So this reduction would help to achieve distinct zones with clearly defined purposes, which help to make the zones and the bylaw in general easier to use and understand. And it would also allow for a range of developments and adaptability over time while providing the tools for us to implement the new city plan. The second topic area is the proposed approach for uses. So this topic area includes 3 ideas to explore. The first idea would be defining the land uses more broadly. So currently the zoning bylaw contains 127 different land uses. And the example that I gave in the last slide of a retail store and a restaurant, those are 2 examples of different land uses in the zoning bylaw. But having so many different uses results in significant complexity and also creates redundancies. And it limits the flexibility for shifting business models and and different built forms over time. For the new bylaw, we're currently proposing 20 broadly defined land use categories, which would allow for more straightforward interpretations, more flexibility and adaptability, more mixing of uses, and generally less red tape for business. The second idea would be regulating land uses based on their land use impacts. There are currently a number of uses in the zoning bylaw which may be susceptible to regulation and decision-making on moral grounds or other non-land use oriented factors. So some examples include pawn stores, bars and neighborhood pubs, breweries, wineries, and distilleries. For the new bylaw, we'll be focusing on regulating those land uses based on the land use impacts that they have in common with other similar uses. And this can improve equity by regulating uses that have similar impacts in the same way. Meanwhile, other municipal tools can be used to address issues that zoning can't effectively address or just isn't well oriented to be able to address. The third idea is regulating discretionary uses with conditional uses. Sorry, replacing discretionary uses with conditional uses. So discretionary uses are land uses that the development planner reviewing a development permit application has the discretion over whether or not to approve. So once approved, the notification would go out to surrounding property owners. And while some will still value that notification, the use of discretion and the uncertainty over how that discretion gets applied can contribute to a less transparent, less predictable, and generally inequitable permitting process, while also causing longer development permit review times. In place of discretionary uses, we propose to move to conditional uses, which must meet a set of clearly defined additional regulations in order for them to be approved. This approach would negate the opportunity for notification, but it will improve the transparency and the predictability for when those uses would be approved. So also, if an applicant proposes to vary a regulation for a conditional use or any other regulation in the bylaw, notification would still occur. And finally, our third topic is the approach to residential areas. So we understand this is an important topic for many people, and we wanted to have a separate space for this discussion. The topic has two main ideas to explore. The first is reducing the total number of residential zones. To do this, we would move away from the 15 current residential zones. Many of those current zones support very similar development outcomes, but with regulations that differ slightly from zone to zone. And this can create overlap and inconsistency. So two homes may be regulated differently despite being located in areas with very similar characteristics. For the new bylaw, we propose a reduction to at least 5 residential zones, including a small scale residential zone, a low-rise residential zone, and at least 1 new mixed use zone. As we mentioned a few slides ago, we're currently working with this zoning advisory consultant, as well as seeking your input through this process to help nail down our list of proposed new zones. So this list is very much live. It's very much sort of subject to change at this point. And reducing the total number of residential zones will allow for a clear distinction between the zones to help make the bylaw more user-friendly, create opportunity for more types of housing to be built in a neighborhood, and to reduce the need for rezonings. The second idea we're exploring is reducing the number of residential uses. To do this, we'd move away from the current 12 residential uses, which separates housing types and opens the door for exclusion and inequity by limiting housing choice in many parts of the city. Instead, we propose to move to a single residential use. And this approach follows the premise that regardless of how the dwellings are arranged within a building, the activities occurring inside the building are roughly the same. We're all living a life. And that said, different housing types and intensities may generate different land use impacts, and these impacts can be regulated where necessary. The approach would allow for greater variety of housing options throughout the city, supporting greater equity and inclusion while making efficient use of our land and resources. So that's a very brief, although maybe not as brief as some might like, but a very brief overview of what engagement during this phase will be covering. So we invite you to engage with these topics through 2 key activities. Up until July 7th, you can provide feedback in 1 or all 3 of the workbooks, which can be found on engaged.edmonton.ca/zoning bylaw renewal initiative. It's a mouthful, but it's there on the screen. And you're welcome to come to one of our upcoming workshops on these topics. So just on the workbooks themselves, these 3 workbooks cover each of the 3 different topics that I just walked through. The workbooks are structured so that you can zoom in on the idea or topic that interests you. They're long in terms of page count, but once you dig in, you'll find that much of the length is supporting context and background information on these topics. And as Beth said, the zoning bylaw itself is a long and complex beast, and so we're doing our best to make it as accessible as we can. Next slide. The workshops will be 2 hours each. So this is the workshops now, will be 2 hours each. Members of the zoning bylaw renewal team will be there, so it's an opportunity to ask us questions on what we're proposing and get clarification on what's being proposed. And although there are 2 sessions offered for each topic, you do not need to attend both sessions. The material covered in the sessions will be the same in both. And again, information about registration is at engaged.edmonton.ca.